We're nearing the end of this Epiphany series. We're nearing the end of the season of Epiphany. I think March 5th is Ash Wednesday this year, which will start Lent. So this week and next week is it for this series. In this series, we've been focusing on some of the scenes of the Bible when God calls people to, or someone to do something great, something risky. I believe God is calling each of us toward great things that require risk, that require hope and courage and perseverance. And to that end, I want to talk about something tonight that keeps a lot of us stuck in that journey. Something that holds dreams hostage, something that keeps calling but never seems to arrive. It's something that I'm very susceptible to, and that something is the right time. Have you ever heard someone say or caught yourself thinking or saying, I'll start when things settle down, or I'll do that when I'm married, or when I have the right job, or when I have enough money, when my kids are grown up, when I get a promotion, when I'm retired, or I'm just waiting for the right moment. The older I get, the more I am convinced that if that's where you're at, you should pull up a chair and get comfortable, because if you wait for the right time, if you wait for conditions to be perfect, you'll be waiting forever. The author of Ecclesiastes, one of the wisdom books in the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, speaks to this in chapter 11, verse 4, writing, "Those who wait for perfect weather will never plant seeds. Those who anxiously look at every cloud will never harvest crops." In other words, if you're waiting for perfect conditions, you will never get started. Jesus teaches on this idea, or addresses this same idea, in this teeny tiny itty bitty micro story in Luke near the end of chapter 9. Jesus and his entourage are traveling along a road, as they did, and he has these three super short exchanges with three different people who want to become his followers. All three conversations are in the same vein, but we're just going to focus on the middle conversation tonight. So this is Luke 9, verses 59 through 60. He, Jesus, said to another man, "Follow me." But he replied, "Lord, first let me go bury my father." Jesus said to him, "Let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and proclaim the kingdom of God." That's the whole story. I meant it when I said itty bitty, teensy weensy. Jesus asks this guy to follow him. It's one of the few people outside of the disciples that Jesus actually asks to follow him. And the guy responds positively. He says, "Yes, absolutely. Let me go bury my father first." And Jesus essentially says, "No, that's not important. You're either on board or you're not." And when you first read this, it's really easy to think like, geez, Jesus, what is your problem, man? It just feels so harsh. Like, can you imagine saying that to somebody? Someone whose father has just died? Like, don't worry about that. Forget about that. Come do this thing. There's a lot of cultural context going on here under the surface that in just an English translation 2,000 years later we miss. In this time and culture that Jesus is in, people saw honoring their parents as a son's most important responsibility. And making sure that they were properly buried was the ultimate way to show that respect. So skipping out on this duty wasn't just like frowned upon. It wasn't like a no-no. It was unthinkable. It could get you shunned by your family and leave you dishonored in your village for the rest of your life. That's not a very hard thing for us to imagine today, right? That's not too wildly different. There's still a lot of importance today put on caring for our family in this way, right? You'd never dream of telling someone to forget about helping arrange their father's funeral, right? It was an even bigger deal in this culture. So much so that we can say with confidence that this man's father is not dead. If the man's father had just recently passed, he wouldn't be out on the road chatting it up with a rabbi. He would have dropped everything to handle the burial right away. So what's going on here? Why would he claim he needs to go bury his father if his father isn't dead? Is he lying to Jesus and Jesus is calling him out on it? Or does he like suddenly remember that he's got this obligation to take care of? Oh, right. Sorry, my dad died a couple hours ago. I have to go take care of that. You know when you ask someone to help you move? And suddenly everyone becomes real responsible and has all these things that they need to take care of, and it just so happens to be on that same day that you need help moving at that same time? Is that what's going on here? Is that what this guy is doing? Not quite. Interestingly, or at least I think this is interesting, some scholars point out that when someone at this time said, I must first bury my father, that wasn't always about an immediate funeral, like it seems when we read it at face value. Sometimes it was just a polite way of saying, let me take care of my father until he passes, which could mean delaying things for years to fulfill that family obligation. That's likely what's going on here. He's basically saying, I have to stick close to home until after my father dies and I've properly cared for him. Totally reasonable, right? That explains the man's answer, but it does not clear up Jesus' response. What he says is still just as jarring and just as offensive and just as shocking as we think. Jesus often used graphic or shocking language to make his point, and that's what he's doing here. It's meant to grab our attention. It's not meant to be overly harsh or uncaring. He's making a point. And what he's really saying is, don't wait. Don't delay. Don't wait for everything to be in order. Don't wait for your life to be perfect. Follow me now. I don't think most of us have a problem with wanting to pursue the right things. Most of us don't even have a problem with most of us don't even have a motivation problem. I think we have a waiting problem. We think once I have enough money, or once I get the promotion, or once my kids are older, once I feel more confident, then I'll do this thing. But let's be real, when have the conditions of your life ever perfectly lined up for anything other than no one being available to help you move? We can always find a reason why things aren't quite right yet. We can always think it will just be better when. Let me tell you kind of a sad story. There's a man, we'll call him Tom. I had to come up with a name that I didn't think anyone in the room would have. If you are here and your name is Tom, I'm sorry. I would love to meet you. We're going to call this guy Tom. He felt called to start his own social enterprise. He wanted to make the world a better place through a business that could help provide single mothers, succeed by providing affordable housing and vocational training and experience in childcare. His mom raised him and his siblings on her own, and he saw firsthand just how crushing that could be, and he wanted to do something about it. But he kept saying, I'll start when I have more in savings. And then it was, I'll start when the economy is better. And then it's, I'll start when my kids are out of the house. And you fast forward a few decades, and Tom was still saying, I'll start when this or that. He was busy watching the wind, right? He was busy checking the clouds. He was busy waiting for perfect conditions. And in the end, he never pursued this dream that God called him to. Life passed him by while he waited for the perfect time, for the right time, and it never came. That is terrifying to me. But contrast that story with the story about Peter that we looked at just a few weeks back. So just to recap, Peter is on a boat with the other disciples. It's early hours in the morning before sunrise. They see Jesus out walking on water, but they think he's a ghost, so they're freaking out. And Jesus says, fellas, calm down, it's just me. And Peter says, if it's really you, totally normal reaction from Peter, if it's really you, tell me to come out to you. Tell me to walk on the water over to you. And Jesus says, come on over. I think, notice Jesus didn't say, hold on, Peter. Like, let's make the water a little bit more smooth for you. Let's get the lighting just right. Tie a rope around your waist and give it to one of the other guys to hold on to just in case. Jesus just said to him, come on, let's go, dude. And Peter did it. He stepped out of the boat and walked on water. 11 other guys stayed put. 11 other guys played it safe. Peter took a giant risk. And he experienced something so profound and miraculous that it completely changed his life, and we're still talking about it 2,000 years later. Why? I don't think just because it's like a miraculous, magic-like story of someone walking on water. I think it's a story that so perfectly captures a truth that we all know somewhere deep down inside of us. The miracle isn't in waiting for calm waters. The miracle comes in stepping out while the waves are still raging. Now, some of you might be thinking, I'm just being cautious. Like, I'm just being wise. This is what I tell myself all the time. And of course, wisdom and caution are important. Like, you don't want to be reckless. And if you're someone who's prone to recklessness, maybe the lesson for you is what we've talked about previous weeks in learning to wait. But if you're someone more prone to playing it safe, like me, there is a fine line between being wisely cautious and making excuses. And some of us, if we're honest, aren't waiting due to our wisdom. We're waiting due to our fear. Usually about things completely outside our circle of control, like we talked about last week. We're waiting on our fears to be eased. We're waiting until we feel ready. You hear this a lot from people when they're thinking about getting married or thinking about starting a family. I hear it all the time from people who are facing a big decision. I just don't feel ready. Let me free you from that idea. You're never going to feel fully ready. There is no mystical, magical point that you'll reach when you suddenly feel fully ready to do anything risky. There will always be some level of uncertainty. That's what we mean when we talk about faith, stepping out in faith. Faith is not the absence of uncertainty. Faith is not the absence of fear. Faith is stepping out even when you don't have all the answers. Faith is trusting God even when the clouds look heavy and the wind is howling. Like I said, we can always find a reason to put something off. A reason why we should wait until later to do something. Moses was masterful at this. We talked about this a few weeks ago too. When God appears to Moses in the burning bush and tells him to go lead the Hebrew people out into freedom from Egypt, Moses immediately starts listing all the reasons why he's not the guy for the job. I'm not a good speaker. What if they don't believe me? And God eventually has to say to Moses, like, it's okay that you're not a good speaker. I made mouths and language. Like, who gave you breath? It was me. I got this. You have everything you need. Then there's Abram, who we talked about the very first week this year. When God calls him to leave everything that he's known, to go out and do something that no one has ever done before, and to plant the seeds of what would become a great nation, unlike any nation that had ever existed before, Abram had to have had a moment thinking like, you want me to do what? But God wasn't calling him based on where he was at that time. God was calling him based on what he knew, who he knew Abram could become. And the same is true for you. You may feel unqualified, you may feel unready, you may feel unsure. But here's a pithy little line that I heard someone once say that has stuck in my head, and I'm sure I rolled my eyes at it the first time I heard it, but it is proven true. God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies those he calls. God does not call qualified people. He qualifies the people that he calls. He's just waiting for you to take the next first step. So let me ask you again the question that I've been posing to you in this series. What are your stormy waters? What's beckoning you to come take a step out? What's the thing that you know that you need to do that you've been waiting for the right time to do? Maybe it's a business, like the story that I told you about Tom. Maybe it's a ministry. Maybe it's a conversation that you need to have. Maybe it's habits or addictions that you need to address. A relationship you need to pursue, or a relationship you need to start taking seriously. Reconciliation or forgiveness that you need to initiate. Maybe it's a dream that you've just been burying under when I'm ready. What if today is the day that you stop waiting and start walking? What if today is the day that you stop watching the wind and start planting seeds? Because here's the thing about seeds that you might not know. You never know which one is going to take off. That's what the rest of the thought from that passage of Ecclesiastes that we started out with tonight says. In verse 6, it says, sow your seed. Go to work in the morning and stick to it until evening without watching the clock. You never know from moment to moment how your work will turn out in the end. In other words, stop overthinking. Stop waiting for the perfect conditions. Just plant. Just move. Just go. Maybe you're worried about failure. I'm right there with you. That is my number one fear that holds me back from doing anything. We talked about this with Peter walking on water. Maybe you're afraid to step out and sink. Stepping out in faith often makes things harder, especially initially, right? But oftentimes we grow the most when we fail. And in that sense, it's not failure at all. Failures are steps on the path to growing into who you've been created to be. Don't be afraid to grow. Get busy failing. Let's not be people who live with regret, who live in the knowledge of what could have been if only. Let's not be people who get to the end of our lives and realize that we never left the shore. We never left the boat because we were too busy waiting for the wind to die down. Take a step out of the boat. Take the risk. Do the hard thing. Say yes to what God has placed on your heart. Now, because there is no such thing as the right time. There's no such thing as the perfect conditions. The wind might never stop blowing. The clouds might never clear. And you will never feel fully ready. Do it anyway. Don't wait. Go. Step out. Trust God. If he's calling you to it, he's going to get you through it. Would you pray with me? God, I pray that you would continue pushing us toward growth. That you would continue putting the next step in front of us that we need to take in order to grow into who you've created us to be. God, help us to be a community that doesn't grow complacent. Help us to be a community that can encourage and spur one another on toward what you have for us as a church and as individuals. God, thank you for the gift that it is to get to come and worship together on Tuesday nights and to be reminded of who you are and what you ask of us. God, we love you. Amen.